Greetings, Portage First. This is Pastor Michael coming to you with the next of our O Antiphons. These are reflections and a series of prayers that are prayed in the days before the Christmas Eve celebration that are reflections upon Jesus as the coming Messiah. They're usually Old Testament references that have become applied to Jesus throughout the years to describe who Jesus is. I remind you that encoded within the Latin derivations of each of these, there is a secret message that the church has whispered down to us through the years. And we just have today's and tomorrow's, and then we'll have all the pieces that we need to put together the secret code. So I hope you're looking forward to that as much as I am. As today we reflect on the next of the O Antiphons, and in Latin it is O Rex Gentium. O Rex Gentium. Now, the word gentium is the root of the word gentleman, gentry, gentile, and what it means is nations. And so, O Rex Gentium is O King of the nations. It's kind of funny to me to think about that because I had a man that I knew years ago who had a husky dog. And this husky, his name was Rex. And Rex means king, of course, and to be honest with you, this dog was king. Now, he had that kind of personality that husky dogs have. I don't know how many of you are familiar with them or if you had much exposure to them, but they are show dogs par excellence. Like they're hams. They are complete and utter hams. They mimic human speech. They have very animated faces, and they do a lot of funny things. And it just so happens that Rex decided one day he was an adorable dog. He had a little bandana around his neck. He had so much personality, and Rex ran the roost. And this gentleman had him in the back of his truck one day, and they were driving along, and they pulled over to a stoplight. Rex just decided, I'm gonna go for a little run. He jumped out of the truck, and this gentleman who owned him, he yelled after him, come back, come back. And the dog went running away, and he couldn't find him, and he couldn't find him for 2 days. And he came back, and he drove around, and he was going through the neighborhood. And wouldn't you know it, one day, the dog, after 3 days, the dog just showed up at his front door, just looking perfectly content, like he'd had the best time of his life. Well, this guy was so excited to have his dog back, he gave him a nickname, CB, for come back. And he was so excited that he went out and he bought the dog a Burger King hamburger. And that was his fatal mistake. Because from then on, whenever the dog wanted a Burger King hamburger, he would just jump out of the truck or run away. And he just knew that if he did that he could possibly get another Burger King hamburger. Now, the guy did eventually figure this out, and he started to disappoint the dog, and the dog did stop finally running off on his own. But the idea of being king is often one that we fantasize about, right? Being the person in control, being the one who's running the roost, being the one who gets what they want when they want it. Although I'm told, for the people who actually have the job, Queen Elizabeth and her children and her grandchildren, I'm told for the people who actually have the job, it's not as nice as it sounds. The continual scrutiny, the watching over everything you do, the continued dedication to public life no matter what, the truly relentless sense of duty, the fact that you're always, always, always on. I bet you it's pretty exhausting. I bet you it's a pretty difficult thing. The ancient world didn't have concepts like democracy. They didn't necessarily have concepts, at least where Jesus was, they didn't have concepts like democracy. They didn't necessarily have concepts. The Republican concept was just beginning. Constitutions, all of these things were not necessarily a part of the ancient world. What they did have, though, were kings and rulers. And all the people were seeking after kings and rulers. The Roman era was marked by the first senates, the first gatherings of sort of aristocracy. But the funny thing about the Roman Senate is that you kind of had to be born into it in order to be a part of it. And so it really was just its own sort of landed gentry sort of situation. They didn't have this concept of someone rising up from the hovel to become a senator one day. That moved through family to family. It was basically monarchy in its way. And so the idea of having a king or a queen or a ruler, the desire that people had for a good ruler, for a kind ruler, for a ruler who is merciful. Well, this is one of those things, a ruler who's not just a ruler of himself, and not just a ruler of his country, but a ruler for all people. This was actually a dream that people had. They dreamed of a ruler who was good and kind to you no matter who you were or where you came from. You know, one can say that the Old Testament could be a story of xenophobia, that they were always so interested in just themselves as God's chosen people, that they had to write rules and laws about how you are to treat foreigners in your midst, and how you're to treat people who aren't like you, and how you're to act towards them, because it didn't come naturally that they would welcome people who were different than them. The ancient Greeks had a word for anyone who couldn't speak their language. They called them barbarous, which means barbarian. It's where we get the word barbarian. And the idea was that when they heard you speak, all they could hear was bara, bara, bara. They couldn't hear you say anything else. It didn't make any sense. And the reality of welcoming people who are not like you is a story that comes to us from the manger and from the story of Jesus' birth itself. Matthew's gospel records the coming and the visiting of the Magi. He records that the Magi came. Now, what do we know about these ancient Magi? Well, we know that they were astrologers or astronomers at the time. They knew that they had seen a great star in the sky. They had interpreted that star to mean that a new and great king was being born, so they desired to meet this new and great king. They traveled all the way here. They traveled all the way to Bethlehem, and they saw the child. And then, having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, the actual king of the people, they returned home. What's interesting is that Matthew seems to be drawing a picture between these Magi and his own people. While these foreigners, while these people who are not Hebrews, recognize the Hebrew Messiah, my own people, says Matthew, my own Hebrew people, my own Jewish leadership do not. It stands as a beautiful reminder to us that sometimes people who are different than we are can see aspects and images of God that we cannot. That the church is in fact strengthened by diversity. And so throughout history, the Magi are always depicted in three. Sadly, they're usually always all men. And there's nothing in the Bible and nothing in history that says that the Magi, which means scholar, by the way, not king, there's nothing in the Bible that says that the Magi couldn't have been women. In fact, since they were Persian in derivation, there could have been women scholars. That they were well known to have educated women in Persia. There was actually an expectation that wise women were supposed to be educated so that they could be good conversationalists. But we always depict them in threes, and we tend to depict them in different colors. Usually there's someone of African descent, someone of Chinese descent, and someone who is as lily white as my own German background. And as we look at these persons, as we look at them together, the idea is that all nations gathered beside the Christ child, and he is indeed the ruler of all the nations. He wasn't just the Messiah of the Jewish people. He wasn't just the Messiah of the Christian people. He is the good ruler that we've always desired, the wise and great King. And so on this day, we sing together, usually, and pray together, O King of the nations, and their desire, the cornerstone making both one, come and save the human race, which you fashioned from clay. It draws a picture of a king like no other, a king who's not just a king, but a creator, one who made us, one who formed our inmost being, a king who is good, a king who will save us, a king who's king over everyone, for indeed are not all of us creations of God. Isaiah writes in chapter 9, verse 6, For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Authority rests upon his shoulder, and he shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. He shall judge between the nations, he shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. That comes from Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. Imagine having a king whose might does not come from military strength, but a king whose might and goodness comes from the strength of his mercy. Imagine for a moment, as it says in Isaiah chapter 64, verse 8, But now, O Lord, thou art the Father, we are the clay, thou art the potter, and we are all the work of thy hand. A king who acknowledges not only his responsibility to his own people, but a king who recognizes his responsibility to all the people of the world. Jesus is this king. Jesus is this righteous ruler. Jesus is this one who sees and oversees, who cares for and watches over the people as their benevolent and loving ruler. A king who rules not by might, but by mercy. O come, desire of nations, bind all peoples in one heart and mind. Bid envy, strife, and quarrel cease. Fill the whole world with heaven's peace. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. Come, O ruler of the nations.